All right, we want to welcome in former Eagles president Joe Banner. Of course, the big issue here in Philly, when will the trade of Carson Wentz happen? Joe, we appreciate the time.
Well, pleasure to be on with you, John. And that is a great question. And I think the answer is pretty soon. I think within the next 2 to 3 days, and could happen at any time. But the timing is harder to predict than the outcome.
So the outcome, Joe, I mean, it looks like the Colts and the Bears are talking to the Eagles. Do you think that the Eagles will be able to get a first-round pick and a good return here?
No, I think considering the circumstance, I think they'll get a good return. They're not going to get a return like, a premium quarterback, as many viewed him like in 17 and 18. But I think they'll get back compensation that they'll have a chance to turn into some hole filling. But people should be realistic. He's coming off a difficult season. He's got a challenging contract for the team acquiring him. But there's enough teams looking, and, he did have some good years for people to convince themselves that they can fix him and I think get some decent compensation.
Do you think it is more than the Bears and Colts? And do you think it comes down to the team that maybe is the most desperate right now for a good quarterback?
Yeah, listen, I would say that I think the Colts and the Bears are clearly the favorites. But there are a number of other teams looking for quarterbacks, so who knows what we don't know. There's a big difference, I think, from his perspective, probably. In both cases, he goes back to a former coach. On one team seems like to go back to a team in the Colts that are a lot closer to having a chance to win big and give him an offensive line that probably seems to need a little extra, a few tenths to make the right decision with the ball. And I think the Colts provide him a good opportunity to do that.
Joe, how did we get to this point? Because I know the reports were out there that Carson did not want to stay and he wanted to go somewhere else. But the Eagles said, hey, we're going to hire a new coach. Nick Sirianni was hired. They did hire a quarterbacks coach who has connection to Jalen Hurts. At what point do you think the Eagles said, okay, we're going to move on now?
Yeah, listen, I felt when they benched him, it was a more major statement than people made it out to be. I had no illusions about how poor he was playing. There's no reason to think that would change. But they knew that they risked really damaging the relationship with him, with there being a chance that it wouldn't be something they could recover from. So I'm not saying they predicted this or knew this, but I'm sure they knew it was within the range of possibilities. So since that moment, in my mind, I thought there was a real good chance he wouldn't be back next year. As we saw things evolve, it just became really clear that that was going to be the final outcome.
Now, a lot of people like Andrew Brandt, a friend of yours, and he knows all about the cap, as you do, said this will never happen. They will never trade Carson Wentz. Are you surprised we are at this point, though?
Well, it depends when you ask me. If I surprised from a year or two ago, I'm totally shocked. I love the player in the draft. I thought signing the contract early with the quarterback market about to explode was smart. And, here we are and worrying about not will he get traded, but will they get fair compensation back? It's kind of shocking. I don't know how anybody could have anticipated. I can't think of a comparable instance in sports. We've seen somebody achieve the levels he had and then now last year's film, he's not even a starter in the NFL. So how did we get from A to B? I don't think we'll ever know, and I don't even have a good theory.
Now, you've got some great insights and perspectives on Twitter. Of course, a lot of people thought because Carson had issue with Doug Pederson that the Eagles fired Doug because of Carson, maybe to try to appease him, and that hiring a new coach, maybe they would have in mind Carson Wentz, because, of course, Nick Sirianni has a connection to Frank Reich. And you don't think that was the main reason for doing these things, right?
No, listen, I know Jeff and Howie very well, and I haven't talked to them, and I don't know what I'm about to say, but I know how they think. And I know when I was there, we were very clear that we never wanted to hire a coach for the situation that existed in the moment, because we were hiring a coach because the situation in the moment wasn't good. So what we wanted to do was really hire somebody that met what we thought the qualities that the top coach in the league had. And, they're around the classic leadership, hiring a good staff and managing them well, attention to detail. There's a whole group of qualities that we were looking for. So for me, knowing the way Jeff and Howie both think, there was never any doubt that that's how they viewed the hiring. Now, obviously, whoever the quarterback is, they're hoping that he'll be, make him as good as he can possibly be. But the decision was made based on these kind of broad criteria that most of the top head coaches fit.
Help me understand the dead money, because, of course, it would be an NFL record close to $34 million in dead money. But also, is there dead money the following year?
Yeah, so the term is kind of self-explanatory in this context. It's dead money. In other words, it's money that you can't spend for a player that's no longer on your team. So if the cap, let's just say it's 200, which is a round number, and let's call it a $35 million write-up, the Eagles will effectively be operating with a cap of $165 million, so $35 million less. They have to fit the 53 players into that remaining 165, while the rest of the league is at the 200 number. Of course, between Stafford and Goff and a few other moves, there are a number of teams that actually have depressed cap numbers, for the year. So they'll be praying for as high a cap number as they can. And as I remember the contract, I do not think in this scenario, if they were to move him here in the immediate future, meaning some other team will be paying this roster bonus that's coming up, I do think they can get all of the charges related to him out of the way this year, which of course, may leave them better or worse at quarterback, but will certainly leave them in much better cap shape over the next 2 to 3 years.
So would it be 34 or around 34 million this year,
Yeah.
or is there another 24, 25 million that would be added to that as well?
No, again, I looked at the contract when they signed it, and I've seen what the media reports. I have not gone back and read it, but I believe that if they take this 34 million and change hit this year, then they can move on from there. Now, if they did the trade after June 1st, that's different. There'd be some charges in this year and some in next year. So maybe that's what some people were writing about. I believe if they do in fact do the trade now, not only agree to it, but execute it as soon as the league year begins, I'm reasonably sure that 35 million rounded off is and they're done.
So hindsight is 2020, of course, or maybe 2021. When you look back, they signed him to a contract extension just over a year and a half ago. He was coming off the knee injury in 2017, the back injury in 2018. Do you look back at this as a mistake signing him a little early, or did they get a really good deal for the marketplace?
Well, it's both. I mean, with hindsight, now that we know what happened, it's clearly a mistake. Nobody could deny that outcome. Although, as I said, had I been in that seat, I would have done the exact same thing. I thought it was a smart thing to do. He had played very well, not perfectly, but very well. He was young and seemed to be getting better. There was reason to believe the quarterback contracts were about to explode, as they have. I mean, they signed him at 32. As you say, a year and a half later, the top guys were getting 40. I mean, that's a large difference, $8 million per year. So I think they did the right thing, but sometimes you do the right thing and it doesn't work out for circumstances that you really can't predict. But no doubt, if we're sitting here with the benefit of hindsight, was it a mistake? Yeah, it was a mistake. But I think there were good reasons to do what they did at the time.
And there were good reasons about drafting Jalen Hurts. The fact that Carson was hurt for their biggest games, the playoff games, and you get a cheaper backup, and maybe you can grow him and he can become a starter. But do you think in the end, drafting Jalen Hurts had a much bigger effect in the day-to-day human factor with Carson and the team?
It's hard to know that. I mean, it is true that he voiced some disturbance about the pick, but it wasn't like he, went overboard or anything, but he did voice it. If he's that fragile, he's probably not going to survive as a quarterback in the NFL. But I know of him and how he's been described to me by people working every day. They don't describe him as very fragile. In fact, confidence to a point that maybe goes too far as opposed to too little. So I'd be surprised if that's what kicked this off. I mean, I really think that he played poorly. I don't think the coaches gave him the best chance. Obviously, the injuries between the weapons and the offensive line would have some impact. That's not to free him of responsibility. He had to and should have played better than he did. So there's a lot of factors in there that, give one reason to believe that whoever acquires him, there's a chance he'll be able to turn around and get back to where he was.
Joe, with everything the Eagles gave up to get Carson and draft him, the contract extension, the expectations, I was thinking of maybe the saddest or toughest breakups to see in Philly sports history. And obviously the Eagles and T.O., when that happened, is one of them. The Flyers and Eric Lindros. I mean, where do you think this is going to rank as far as breakups in our Philly sports history?
Well, it's significant, as you say, because of how they acquired him in the contract. I think that the people that were part of a championship, which Carson sort of was, but not completely, are the ones that the city will remember with the most pain about some departure, when they took place. And I think that's true in most places. I mean, everybody loves their team to do well and loves to at least get in the playoffs. But the truth is, the real joy is in that occasional championship. And, I think the people in Philadelphia appropriately had a special place in their heart for people that won or were part of winning a championship. And so Carson falling slightly short will not make this inconsequential, but I think we'll put it a notch below some of the other ones you mentioned.
Do you think we're seeing a little bit of a change here? We saw the NBA, how star players and the guys with the biggest contracts who have the power were able to find their way to another team. Now, it's not happening in every situation, but you're seeing a bunch of quarterbacks now being drafted 4 or 5 years ago. They're switching teams, and it looks like Carson wanted out. Do you think we're seeing more of that?
Yeah, and I think Carson turned out to be a little more mutual than that, but absolutely around the league, and we've been seeing it slowly, one step at a time, probably over the last 4 or 5 years. It's funny, I used to, when I worked for a team, like hearing this. When I didn't, I thought it was stupid, but the notion that a player doesn't have leverage, a player withholding his services is ultimate leverage. So I think the players have now come to the point where they're not quite as willing to just accept whatever's said, and they realize that the opportunity, the possibility, some players are uncomfortable to because they signed a contract, they feel an obligation to honor it. Other people feel like, hey, I'm playing a game a short time. I have a right to maximize my earnings. And if I need to do X or Y to do that, I'm going to do it. And I think the players are now fully realizing, well, we had a lot more plays. By the way, even some of the agents didn't fully appreciate just how much leverage the players had by potentially, withholding services. So I think this is still moving in that direction. I still think we're going to see this move significantly more towards the players' recognition and utilization of the leverage that they have.
Wow. So in this situation, let's say Carson doesn't necessarily want to go to the Bears and he would rather go to Indianapolis and be reunited with Frank Reich. Can he kind of push that and cause the deal to be done with the Colts?
Well, he can influence the deal, and his agent can influence the deal. The agent could be making it clear to one of the teams which place he'd rather go. And again, this is true in any instance, not just Carson. And, an acquiring team, especially of a quarterback, is not going to want to acquire a player that doesn't really want to be there. So there's subtle ways they can influence. So they can also make an appeal to Howie. Listen, we're having a breakup, we're getting divorced, but we had some great time together. Can we try to work on this together? And hopefully you can get what you need, but you can also be conscious of what he's looking for. So, sometimes those things go on behind the scenes. And in this instance, if there's a possibility to work it out in a place that both Wentz feels good about and the Eagles are able to get, hopefully the ballpark of what they're looking for, I'd hope they have a bias towards that outcome.
Joe, the NFL comes at you fast. I mean, 3 years ago, we just talked about it. Eagles were winning a Super Bowl. And now these main characters are either on their way out or have been let go. So the Eagles in their situation now, after they make this deal, the salary cap position that they're in, because they were going for it the last few years after the Super Bowl, how tough of a spot are they in?
Well, the way I say it is it's not nearly as tough as it looks like it is on paper, but it is tougher than the situations they've been in for many years, maybe since there was a cap. They're actually going to have to make some decisions that will factor in or structure some deals aware of the cap situation they're in. In the past, they could pretty much, with a little bit of futzing around, they could get the cap to come out and pretty much fit in everybody they wanted. This will be a one-year situation, especially if they trade Wentz. But it will be more difficult. I mean, some guys that they were on the borderline about, or maybe some guys that I think of like a Brandon Graham that may be making a little bit more at an age that they really think is justified, but they'd actually love to have him come back. They may be in more of a position where they have to be a little harder about those situations they have. But people shouldn't be fearful that have to dismantle this team or get rid of players that could be, part of the future. It's not that serious a situation. It's pretty solvable. Now, I'm saying that thinking there are a few obvious players like a Deshaun Jackson and Alshon Jeffries that we all know are getting cut. And the work to be done after that with a little bit of an increase in the cap is not as bad as people are saying.
Joe, I tell you, we really appreciate the insight, the perspective, and follow Joe Banner on Twitter because he knows what's going on. And we really appreciate the time tonight.
John, it's great being with you. I appreciate it as well. Enjoyed it. Thanks.